Hello, my documentary is the Tillman story, and the main thrust of the Tillman story documentary is about a family's fight to find out the truth about their son's death in Afghanistan. Of course, the son is Pat Tillman, a football player who played at Arizona State University before playing in the NFL with a multi-million-dollar contract for the Arizona Cardinals. He was seen as a true American when he gave up his football career to enlist in the Army. When the family finds out that he has died, they are told a different story than what actually happened. They are told that he was killed in a Taliban raid on his troops, but in reality, that's not what happened. 2 weeks after his death, they find out the real way he died, which is through friendly fire, and try to gain clarity into the situation of what actually happened. The documentary focuses on the family, specifically Pat Tillman's mother, Mary Tillman, trying to discover the truth and realizing what the government is hiding from them. This relates to what we learned in Chapter 1, Politics is Everywhere. Without the government glorifying the fallen soldier's death and treating him as if he were more than just an ordinary soldier who had died in battle, it would not have gotten this much media attention, and there would have been no need to cover up the big mess that happened after his death. The government decisions about the cover-up of how Pat Tillman truly died influenced the way people saw the war in Afghanistan. By making Pat Tillman an all-American hero in the media, the government was able to portray the war in a positive light and show that everyone should find their inner hero and support the war, just like Pat did. In the beginning of all the media surrounding Tillman's death, they said that Tillman was killed by a raid of Taliban. This gave the country a reason to support the war in Afghanistan because the Afghans had killed their American hero. The politics in this decision to spin the death of Tillman into pro-war propaganda is one of the many ways that the government influenced how the nation saw the war in the beginning years. Some important facts that this documentary revealed was that right after Tillman enlisted into the Army, he was immediately treated differently than other soldiers. He got a personal letter from the Secretary of Defense, which not many other people can say that happened, and the generals were told to keep an eye on Tillman because he was special. Another important fact is how the government was able to get away with lying and giving the public limited details about the death of Pat Tillman. The top generals put the blame on a lower general, General Kissinger, to save face, when in reality it was their own decision to cover it up. Another fact was that the soldiers who did end up shooting Tillman were quoted as saying they wanted to stay in the firefight when there was no enemy really to shoot at. They just wanted to be in combat. Also, I learned another fact that Tillman did not want a military funeral or to be buried in a military cemetery, but the Army was trying to persuade his wife after his death to sign off against Tillman's wishes. She ended up not having the military funeral because she didn't want Tillman to be seen as an American hero when really he was just an ordinary guy, and she didn't want him to be glorified. Also, I learned that through this documentary is how easy it is for the government to lie to us about what happens in the wars. Even after the investigation the Army did of Tillman's death, it skipped over important parts to not make the Army look so bad. When the walkthrough of what happened the day that Tillman was shot and killed, there's a soldier with them who was throughout the film who was showing them the different places that Tillman was at each time during the day. The soldiers purposely left out certain places to make it seem as if the soldiers that shot at Tillman were confused instead of they just wanted to shoot the guns. This was to make sure that the Army was not seen in as negative light as they already were in, when all the family really wanted to see was the truth. Amir Bar-Lev, a noted documentary director, directed this documentary, The Tillman Story. He did betray bias by focusing only on one side of the issue at hand. The director filmed the documentary from the family's point of view, not the government's, so it was one-sided, although he did explore that the family's side thoroughly. The film made the government look bad for trying to cover up what really happened and making Pat Tillman's death war propaganda to promote the war in Afghanistan. Nobody in the government was interviewed to say their side of the story, so it was biased towards the family's point of view. There are many important things I learned from watching this documentary. I learned that President Bush was just a puppet during this time in this situation, and the generals involved in the cover-up were telling Bush what to say. I always thought that the president made the decisions regarding the armed forces, but it made me realize that most of the time it is the people beneath him making the decisions and just telling him what to say. Another important thing I learned from this film was how the media is able to spin a story into something totally different. They were able to glorify the death of a fallen soldier and make it a positive thing, which would generate American pride and raise spirits about the war. When I first heard about the death of Pat Tillman, I was in 4th grade, and I was completely influenced by the media into thinking that the war was a good thing, because that was how the media was playing it out to be. Watching this documentary made me realize that the media tells people what they want to hear, not the solid truth. I also learned that if the government had not first said that Tillman was killed by a Taliban raid, the war would not have been supported as much in the early years. I also learned that even though the family worked tirelessly to find out the truth about what happened to Pat Tillman, they were never given a satisfied answer. I think a weakness of the film was the fact that it was so one-sided. The only interviews done were of friends and family of Pat Tillman and the General Kissinger, who was the general that got in trouble for covering up the death, even though it was not his fault. The viewers never sees an interview of the generals who were at the top and actually made the decision to lie to the public. There were also only interviews done by 3 soldiers that were actually in Tillman's troop, and there was no interviews done by the men who shot at him and eventually killed him. I would recommend this film to others because I think that it is a real eye-opener into what the government is telling people and what is actually happening. It shows what makes a scandal for the government and how they try to cover it up, but eventually get caught in their lies. It gives a lot of truth to how Pat Tillman died and why the government needed to spin it into a positive light. I found it very enthralling to watch and learn about the real Pat Tillman, not the person that the media showed him to be. It didn't make him come across as a godlike hero who did nothing wrong, as the media portrayed him, but this documentary showed him as human and real, and showed a completely different side of the story. I found it very informative and intense, and also a great movie, but definitely not one you would watch for fun. It gives information about Tillman's death and makes you feel for the family who lost their son, but had to share that loss with the rest of the world.